the Minnesota legislature enters its last 2 weeks of the regular session, fraud reform is a top priority. At the legislature, the governor and lawmakers are proposing major changes for reforms. A House Fraud Committee has been discussing laws that Minnesota does have and does not have that could make a difference. Joining me right now is the chair of that committee, Representative Kristin Robbins. Thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you for having me. All
right, Chair Robbins, one of the laws that you have talked about, that others have talked about, Minnesota does not have a kickback law. Did that surprise you?
It really surprised all of us on the committee. There is a federal kickback statute, and the agencies can currently stop payment when there's credible allegations of fraud, but they said, well, they're not doing it in some instances because there's no state kickback statute. So both the governor's office and our fraud committee bill will fix that.
Right, and that is in the governor's plan, so it's likely that that will pass because the kickbacks were a major part of the Feeding Our Future scandal. I mean, that's the kickbacks were going right to the head of the organization, the Feeding Our Future, yes, who she was just convicted a few weeks ago. Also, I want to ask you about another law, and it involves the words may versus must. Explain this, because you've talked about this in your committee.
Yes, so this was another instance where we were all sort of stunned. So as I said, the agencies currently have the ability to stop payment where there are credible allegations of fraud. But in testimony over several weeks, many different agencies said that even though they have that authority, because the statute says they may stop payment, not that they must stop payment, they weren't doing it. So they were sort of asking us to put must in the statute so that they're directed to do it. So we certainly are going to work on that.
All right. A question I have is, do you think if must had been there in 2020 when Minnesota Department of Education did try and halt or investigate Feeding Our Future, and they were actually blocked by a district court judge, do you think that would have helped if the word must had been in there?
I think it may have. I think that the case actually turned on something a little bit different about how quickly they were approving or not approving different sites. But I think in general, this will strengthen the agency's hand, because when they go to even negotiate or talk about stopping payment or talking to agent or grantees about cleaning up their act, if they have to say, well, statute's going to require us to stop payment, I think that will probably get more action.
What are some of the things that have also come out of this that you've noticed that may surprise you and some of the other committee members?
Right. I think another piece that really surprised us was that all agencies have people who run the grants management program. They're grants management program managers or whatever, but they all have ability and are recommended to take grants management training through the Office of Grants Management, but that training is not required. And so there are people running hundreds of $1,000, $1 million grants who haven't gone through the training. So again, in our fraud committee bill, we are going to require anybody who does grants management to get the OGM training and also get certified that they've successfully completed it. Because it's one thing to check the box and say, oh, I took the training, but we want to know that they fully understand what is required of them.
That seems pretty basic.
I know.
That seems pretty basic.
It's kind of stunning that we have to micromanage in statute at this level. Personally, I would not prefer that approach, but the agencies keep saying it's not in statute, so we're gonna make sure it is.
Okay, and you're confident that there will be some reforms passed? This
Absolutely.
is bipartisan.
It's bipartisan. Fraud is not a partisan issue, as I've said many times. It's a separation of powers issue, and we as the legislature have the responsibility to make sure the agencies are doing their job. So we have a package. Several other bills have been moving. I have a whistleblower bill. There's the Inspector General bill. There's a legislative version and a governor's version. We have the bill that we've talked about cleaning up some of these requirements. There's the kickback bill. So I think there's going to be great movement on improving oversight of state agencies this session.
I've got to ask you, your name keeps coming up when it comes to two statewide races that are coming up in just a year or so, both the governor's race and the U.S. Senate race. Would you run as a Republican candidate in either one of those races?
You know, I'm very focused on just the next 2 weeks. We are so busy at the legislature. We have so much to get done, and I will consider it and take a look after session. But right now, the most important thing is getting these fraud provisions over and finishing a budget. The state of Minnesota needs us to get a budget done this session, and so we need to be tunnel focused on that, and that's what I'm doing.
All right. And any preference on which you might run if you did consider Senate versus governor?
You know, that will be part of the consideration. Where can I make the most difference?
Okay. Thank you so much for coming in. We really appreciate it.